right. Welcome back to another episode of the Give Your Life to Bitcoin podcast powered by Rock Bros Media. I'm your host, Cordell Rocks. And if you're new to this channel, we discuss all things Bitcoin, politics, economics, culture, and finance. Now, today I have a very special guest for y'all. I'm so excited to bring this man on because his career is something that literally speaks for itself. I mean, the man started out his career in the trades, working as a millwright, working hands-on in different industrial environments and traveling all over the world. Now, over time, that experience evolved into leadership, and today he works as a project manager in the construction industry. Being born in the 1950s, however, this man has seen multiple economic cycles, major market shifts, and massive changes in the way that we work, earn, and think about money. So he brings us a perspective that's shaped by real labor, real responsibilities, and decades of lived experience. So let me be clear, this conversation is not about trying to change anybody's mind about anything. It's more so about bridging generations, comparing worldviews, and ultimately learning from someone who's seen a lot and have built a lot. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, I'll give you guys Tom Genn. Tom, what's going on, brother? Thank you for joining us. How you feeling, man?
Oh, I feel great. Can't complain about anything. The multi-generational thing, you're correct on. Your introduction paints a much rosier picture of me than most people would care to. Like I keep telling you at work, my only hope is to, when I hit heaven, that God's got a sense of humor. Um, Graduated from Michigan State, and I have a master's degree in geophysics, and I'm a union millwright by trade.
Wow,
To the
beautiful.
age part, tied to finances, Cordell is exactly right. When I grew up, money was made out of silver. Now silver's trading for what, $80 an ounce. So
Roughly.
yeah, it's been kind of a wild ride.
All right, man. Well, look forward to extracting a lot of your wisdom, man. I know you spent decades as a millwright, later moving into management. How did that transition change the way that you look at work, value, and time overall?
I grew up in a day when things were a little bit different. You might be the lead manager on a project one week, and then the next week working with your tools because they always struggled to keep their key people busy. But the workload was much more cyclical. So we tried to make a conscious effort to avoid layoffs and to avoid downturns by moving people, managers, and tradesmen from project to project to keep the ones that the companies wanted to keep gainfully employed. Um, so I don't know if that answers what you were talking about.
Yes, sir. Appreciate you sharing that. Now, I know you've traveled all over the world for work. What kind of differences did you notice in how people relate to money in different countries and different cultures?
I think as Americans, we're pretty darn spoiled. I don't know that we realize just how good we have it.
Hmm.
Um, you talk about relating to money. Right now at Lake Orion, we're unloading these really nice crates that have the conveyors in them. I don't know if you saw them when you were out wandering around, but similar crates down in Mexico, if you're unloading conveyor equipment, will get turned into some of the guys who are working for you's homes. Um, the wages in Mexico are fixed by the federal government. You have UAW or traditional UAW workers in the GM Salau plant, for instance, working all week long, and their take-home pay is $100, and they're tickled to death to have that job. To
Hmm.
GM's credit, they make all the food in the cafeterias free and allow the workers to take as much of it home as they choose to because they'll actually take it out of the cafeteria at American Axle or GM Salau and take it home to help feed their families because
Hmm.
their wages are fixed by the Mexican government. Venezuela, I spent a lot of time down there back in the late 70s, early 80s before Hugo Chavez, and that was the third wealthiest country in the Western Hemisphere.
Mm-hmm.
And the last time I was down there, about 15 years ago, people literally were picking through the garbage to find food to eat and anything they could sell or redistribute, because the government was basically the keeper of everything, and wages had devalued, and inflation had driven the cost of everything up so much that people that had been able to afford a lower middle class living or an upper or a middle class living previously no longer could.
Mm-hmm.
That drives migration. I think 8 million people have left Venezuela. Now you start thinking that people are going to be returning. Um, Minimum wage when I got my first job was $2.25, and you worked all week, and your take home pay was $40. But you could go out to Pine Knob and see a real good concert for $3 and sit on the lawn. So things were somewhat relative here, but elsewhere,
Mm-hmm.
not so much.
I got you. Hey, I appreciate you sharing that, Tom. And when you think back to the earliest years of your career, what did it look like to make it, right? Make it financially compared to right now?
Well, when you say make it, you'd have to define that. I think that has changed over the years as well.
Mm-hmm.
When I was a little kid growing up, my dad went off to work. We owned one car, had two TVs, and lived what you would consider a fairly frugal life today, and were upper middle class, or actually considered reasonably wealthy by most people's standards. Um, but people's expectations were a lot less. I mean, we had one car. When my
Mm-hmm.
mom got a car, we were the first two-car family in the neighborhood, and she could suddenly drive the women off to get their hair done during the day. Um, Most women or most mothers were at home all day long. You didn't have two parents in the workforce, you had one.
Mm-hmm.
So expectations are a little bit different. Homes were not 5 and 6,000 square feet.
Mm-hmm.
Homes were, 1,200 and 1,500 square feet. So standards and expectations, I think, have changed quite a bit.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And you were born in the 50s, man. You lived through a lot of inflation in the 70s, Black Monday, the dot-com bubble,
Oh,
2008, COVID.
yeah.
And in today's economy, which period would you say felt like it was the most uncertain while you were in it?
um, Most uncertain or
Hmm.
most turmoil?
Yeah, I guess you
Most
kind of combine those.
most uncertain is a little bit of what's been going on the last 8 or 9 years, where the federal government and people are divided a lot more so than they were, and discussion is a lot harder to have between different groups of people. The
Hmm.
60s were certainly the most tumultuous, in as much as you had John F. Kennedy assassinated, you had Martin Luther King assassinated, Malcolm X assassinated, Bobby Kennedy assassinated, the Vietnam War, segregation, busing to different schools to try to help with segregation or to offset segregation, and you had the weathermen blowing up buildings and unrest on the campuses. So the 60s and early 70s were certainly a lot more tumultuous than they are.
Hmm.
Um, but uncertain is a little bit more. Nobody knows, nobody trusts. Um, Information is 24/7, but you don't know that you can necessarily rely on it.
Right.
You hear an awful lot about fake news. You hear an awful lot about global warming and whether it's to be believed or not. There seems to be a lot less trust in what would be traditionally sources of information than you had back then. So
Hmm.
tumultuous and uprooting 60s and early 70s. Unsure, uncertain now.
Okay. Oh man. You know what sucks, Tom? I was back in 2008. I was a child. I was in the eighth grade, man. And so when we had the world economic crisis, the housing market crisis, I was pretty much oblivious to it all. I wasn't really affected emotionally, spiritually, or financially. But now I'm an adult living through this uncertainty. So we have to share this uncertainty period together. And from your experience, how does inflation actually show up in real life for working people?
Well, take a particular job, and let's say not so much inflation as technology and changes.
Hmm.
You have an awful lot of jobs that I think it's your ability to afford virtually anything, whether it's gasoline, food, or what. It also becomes about discretionary income and how you're able to allocate resources for different things.
Hmm.
I don't know how many of you guys went to college. Michigan State, when I was a freshman, it was $13 a credit hour. When I put my daughter through college not too long ago, it was almost $700 a credit hour. $13 a credit hour. I could go out and get a summer job and make enough money to pay for my tuition for the following year, as well as room and board. The kids today can't do that. Um, so, your ability to pursue different things has definitely been curtailed because of inflation, but
Hmm.
it's mostly the inflation that I see in costs tied to other things like a college education at Michigan State, for example, where it's
Hmm.
not just the inflation costs that have driven things up, it's the administrative costs that have gone along with it.
Okay.
Um, some of the news you and I watch at work and joke about. I think it was Brown University not that long ago that had the gentleman that was disgruntled and they had a couple of students killed and it was a shooting.
Hmm.
Coincidentally, just 2 weeks before, there had been a pretty substantial article done, investigative, by one of the students at Brown, who basically alluded to the fact that there were 7,000 administrators at Brown University for 7,000 students,
Wow.
and that tuition at Brown was $100,000. And he was trying to make the argument that not everybody needs to does have a doctorate that is teaching freshman level courses. A lot of those are taught by TAs. So, why is there so much excessive administration or management involved in an Ivy League education at Brown? Um, so, when you look at the costs at Michigan State, it's not just the inflationary pressures that have driven up the cost, it's also how the university has chosen to administer the tuition that they get and and the monies that come in against an administrative cost that may have professors that are listed on class registries that don't teach. They're there for other
Hmm.
reasons.
Hmm.
Um, so it's not necessarily just inflation. It's also administrative costs. It's also regulations tied to all this stuff. You represent the safety end of our business. Um, when I was a kid growing up in the trades, we didn't have safety on job sites at all. A lot of the arguments that were made was, you hire all these safety people, it drives up the cost of these projects.
Hmm.
What people don't realize is that the costs of the accidents were actually a lot more cost prohibitive. So it's also how you look at and represent the costs and how they're accounted for, um, with the regulations and rules that we have in place and that we continue to add.
Okay.
When I was a kid, light bulbs were free. You know, you went to
Really?
Detroit Edison with a bag of burned out life. Yeah, you went to Detroit Edison with a bag of burned out light bulbs. You handed them the bag, and they gave you all new light bulbs for free. Now with the new LED light bulbs, you know, you buy one light bulb, it's $12. So some of that's tied to, you know, an awful lot of the regulations tied to what you can use for light bulbs anymore.
Hmm. Wow.
It's
Okay.
all sorts of different things like that. It's just a different world to a certain degree.
Okay. Now, from your perspective, Tom, do you think that wages have kept up with productivity over the last few decades?
No, I can tell you absolutely not. The
Okay.
most money I made, adjusted for the cost of living or tied to inflation, was in 1989, 1990. Wait a minute, I got to do the math. I'm off by 10 years. 1999, 2000. Um, Basically, you had a senior manager for a conveyor company working a ton of overtime and made roughly what would be the equivalent in today's dollars of almost $380,000.
Oh God.
Now, you know, if you're earning six figures, everybody considers that to be a lot of money, but um, not relatively so. You know, in 1979, you could buy Motor Trend's Car of the Year, which was a turbocharged Buick Riviera, for $5,500. Now, a new car of a similar genre would cost you 60 to 70,000.
Wow.
But
Wow.
understand the cars are different too. I don't know about you.
Yes,
I
sir.
get into my Jeep Grand Cherokee and my seats are heated, my seats are air conditioned. I have a triple tier sunroof that goes back and forth, and you have massaging seats and all the rest of that.
Right.
My first car, you wanted to adjust your seat back, you got out with a wrench and tightened a bolt up that changed the pitch of the seat. You know, you didn't have any buttons or electronic controls or anything.
It sounds
Some
like
of you
you're
guys
almost
work
trying to
on old
justify
cars,
the
you know
price of
that.
these cars, Tom.
You know, it's all relative. People are living a lot longer driving these cars. They, you know, the safety features in them are incredible.
Okay.
Uh, you know, Bill Cosby had a hell of a, you know, he was a stand-up comedian before he ever got involved in TV, and he did a lot of funny skits. But one of the funniest lines was, "Do you know why they invented seatbelts? Because the ambulance drivers were too lazy to go look for the bodies because they used to get tossed out through the front windshield of the car down the freeway. So we got seatbelts for the bodies and stay in the car."
Okay, I
Seriously.
appreciate you sharing it from that perspective. Like, I didn't think about the safety aspects, right? You can't put a price on being able to live longer, right? Years longer. And like you said, obviously, even in the construction industry over time, we've seen the amount of fatalities that get penciled into most of these projects effectively go to zero. So when we talk about, wages, productivity, inflation, growing up in your era, your time, was there any financial advice that the older generations gave you? And if so, which of those lessons do you still hold up today?
Older generation. I'm going to tell you, well, absolutely to invest. But that was more as a part of a class society. You know, there's some books out there, and Warren Buffett has some knowledge about what the rich people teach their children versus what the people who aren't rich teach their children.
Mhm.
One of them is how you can make money work for you. I think that there's a mindset tied to upper middle class, upper class people that is more investment oriented, more, you know, putting money in your 401ks, trying to max that out, than there is in a traditional millwright who has traditional union pension and social security.
Mhm.
Um, you know, social security, when I was a young guy, your first $35,000 you paid Social Security on. And when you hit $35,000 worth of income, in, March or April, whenever you hit that
Mm-hmm.
threshold, Social Security stopped coming out of your check. Uh, then the next year it was 38,000, and the next year it was 43,000. They constantly harp that they don't raise Social Security taxes on people, meaning the rate that you're contributing hasn't gone up. But now you have to earn, almost $160,000 before Social Security stops coming out of your check. So you're
Mm-hmm.
paying that, 15% that goes into Social Security on 160 grand as opposed to paying it on 30 grand. Um, so it's just a much different world than it had been. And then what does Social Security fund? When I started out in this world, Social Security funded retirement, old people's monies. Now there are
Mm-hmm.
200 or 300 programs tied to Social Security. It's not just the retirement attitude tied to it.
Mm-hmm.
So when you talk about inflation, Social Security hasn't kept pace either. Um, and people are living so much longer. So, that puts an awful lot of stresses on Social Security. As far as safety goes, we used to factor in basically on every large project the attitude that there was going to be at least one fatality. I had seen, I have seen, regrettably, probably about 10 fatalities in my career.
Mm-hmm.
Fortunately, not on any of the projects that I had a hand in managing, but being in proximity to at Lake Orion, at Detroit Hamtramck, which is now called Factory Zero,
Mm-hmm.
Chrysler Belvedere, um, uh, Chrysler Jefferson Avenue, and that was a new plant back in '92.
Okay.
The Rouge. There always seemed to be the attitude tied to that there were going to be fatalities in the industry. And people didn't really look at the cost of those issues. They factored them into their thought process that that's just the cost of doing business. We had a safety professional by the name of Kathy Dobson that made safety very clear to me as a young manager responsible for cost by using an example with a gentleman that had gotten hurt on one of my projects. He broke his hand. We had spent a year chasing after work in the press shop at Ford Auto Alliance, where they make the Mustangs.
Mm-hmm.
Landed about $1 million worth of work and had a lot of fun managing it, getting embedded with Ford down there, doing all that work. And we ended up, doing an awful lot of it. But basically, she used the fact that Dennis's hand being broken and the ensuing workman's comp costs basically was $100,000 in cost, and my profit on $1 million worth of work was roughly $100,000. So she used the finances of the cost to sell me on the incredible value that safety has with these projects, because nobody wants to do, $1 million worth of work and break even. You're taking all
Right.
that risk and all that responsibility and doing all that work and staying up late to earn what? Nothing.
Mm-hmm.
If you're earning 10% on one of these jobs, that's a really good return. And 10% of $1 million was the cost of his hand rework, right? Or whatever you would
Wow.
like to call it, rehabilitation. So
Mm-hmm.
I started looking at the numbers and the math behind how you get involved in safety. Um, and cost sold me on it. Also, it sold me on the fact that I'm not having to explain to some friend's wife on why Jerry Nassar lost his thumb, or taking up a collection for one of the guys that got hurt on a job and throwing $100 at that.
Yeah.
Um, you do not want safety culture created his circumstance in life that isn't as good as the day before he showed up to work for you.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. Okay. Hey, I appreciate you sharing that perspective, Tom. Like you said, it's more so looking at things from a big picture perspective, right? And when we compare what happens in construction to like markets, when systems fail, whether it be construction or finance, what from your perspective is usually the root cause?
Uneducated, well-intentioned meaning.
Hmm.
I think sometimes, and you and I are living it right now. Regardless of your political affiliation, the federal government got behind pushing battery operated electric vehicles well ahead of its time. And General Motors, Ford, and Chrysler jumped on the bandwagon because basically the federal government drove it. Now we're tearing out equipment that never even got used because Americans did not want those styles of electric vehicles. Nobody wants to spend $150,000 on an electric Hummer, and you can't drive it to Zion, you can't drive it to Nashville, and it doesn't work for the market that we currently inhabit. The intentions are good, but the thought process behind the good intentions didn't really work out. I think, capitalism isn't a perfect society by any means, but so far it's the best one that we've come up with.
The best,
You need to
absolutely.
let the market, yeah, you need to let the market drive and the consumer drive what the market produces, not uh, the federal government, not the Swedish government, not the English government. The well-intentioned people create situations that create issues. You were talking about the housing industry in 2008. It did not affect me at all. I rode that out entirely, but
Uh-huh.
understand what caused it. What caused it was well intentioned thoughts trying to get more people into homes, and the relaxation of the regulations tied to lending processes in the Bill Clinton administration, the Glass
Hmm.
Stearns Act, and things like that. Well, we need to get more people into houses. Well, that did two things. Yeah, it got more people into houses, people that couldn't afford them, and they entered at the entry level. But then you had people that, as a result of having more people entering the market, that drove up home costs because you had more people trying to enter them. So the competition for the houses was there. But then you have an awful lot of people like me that are buying two and three houses and a little bit of money into them and then flipping them and trying to make a
Hmm.
bunch of money on them. And some smart guy like you or I, bundled those all together in different kind of derivatives. The mortgages into a derivative that was now an investment vehicle. And then when your neighbor failed on his mortgage and your house is wrapped up in a derivative with 27 other mortgages, it took them a couple of years to unwrap that to find out what the actual value was. Nobody knew. So that's why it was somewhat prolonged and was as hurtful as it was to the overall economy in the United States. But it was
Hmm.
founded in good intentions. Trying to get more people into homes is a great intention, but you can't make them free unless you're the one that's going to pony up and pay for them.
Hey Tom,
You want to buy your
I'm
son or
of the
daughter a house?
mindset that the road to hell is paved with good intentions, right? Um,
Absolutely, and great quote. That's 100% right.
I
I
want you
think
to take a
generally
look
as
at
a
something.
rule,
I want to show you something here. This is a chart from a website called "What the F Happened in 1971," and I'm gonna bring this just chart up here real quick. So here, this is how long it took to save for a house. And if you take a look at this chart, you'll see that around 1950s all the way up to 1970, it roughly took about 2.5 years to save for a home. But right after 1971, as soon as we exited that gold standard, that amount of time actually tripled. So now today it takes three times as longer to simply save for buying a house for the average American family. Now, with that being the case, Tom, has your trust in financial institutions increased, decreased, or stayed about the same over time?
Well, define financial institution. The Federal Treasury that runs a deficit of $1 trillion every year. Um, Morgan, Chase, Stanley, any of the investment houses where people's commissions are through the roof on transactions of any kind. Um, the fact that federal Franklin Delano Roosevelt made it illegal for Americans to own gold from what 1933 to 1971.
Mm-hmm.
We stopped making money out of silver in 1964. So basically, the money is backed by what?
Faith.
Absolutely nothing. Yes. You take what do they want to call it? The Inflation Reduction Act. Really? You're going to print $9 trillion worth of excess money to fund some bill and dump all that money into the system and reduce inflation? Absolutely not. It's all about law of supply and demand. So, you and I talk about Bitcoin. I don't really understand it, but the law of supply and demand drives its value or valuation. It's not really backed by anything other than what you just said, which is trust in a system that values it accordingly. Do I have faith in a 1 ounce gold bar? Yes, but is it going to earn me any livable profit as I matriculate to old age? Is a share of General Motors going to do that? Is Bitcoin going to do that? And that gets into a pretty personal choice for all of us, and that choice is somewhat driven on where we're at in life and how much longer our lives are expected to be. I think
Absolutely.
you can take on your investments when you're 20 and 30 and 40 than you're willing to take on when you're 60 and 70.
Mm-hmm.
So pick an institution and we can discuss whether we have any faith or confidence in it.
Okay. And you've been pretty open, Tom, about, not fully believing in Bitcoin. What is it specifically about it that makes you skeptical?
I don't understand it.
Okay.
That's my ignorance, not yours or anybody else's. And what? I'm just trying to think. We were working up at Flint Truck, and our safety guy up there was talking about Bitcoin all the time. His name was Patrick. I don't remember what Patrick's last name was, but Bitcoin was roughly at 20,000, 22,000. Within 6 months or 8 months of that job, Bitcoin had gone all the way down to 6,000 again, and now it's at what, 93,000? It's
Mm-hmm.
89,000 last week. It fluctuates fairly wildly,
Mm-hmm.
but my only problem with it is I truly do not understand it. I understand what a share of General Motors stock represents and the
Okay.
dividend income tied to it. I understand what a T bill yields and how that functions. And I understand what an ounce of gold does sitting in my safe. But to randomly owe some hypothetical Bitcoin,
Mm-hmm.
for me, I don't have faith in it. I don't not have faith in it. I don't understand it. So it's educational. Bitcoin's entirely new. It's been around for what, 15 years? I'm
17.
not
It
really
just turned
even sure.
17 on January 3rd.
Okay. So it's basically an entirely new investment vehicle, or I don't even know if you'd call it an investment vehicle per se. It seems more of a manner of the ease and the ability of how to move and protect financial resources as opposed to an investment vehicle. I mean, I don't know, people speculate and everything. So I
Mm-hmm.
think that there's a lot of speculation with it, but I think mostly it's a shield against the federal government. I mean, think about it. If you're one of the billionaires in California that's trying to flee California right now because of their
Mm-hmm.
wealth tax, if you've got your $1 billion in Bitcoin, California can't go after it.
Mm-hmm. Precisely.
So that's a good shield. If you're Maduro down in Venezuela and you've taken your narco monies that you've earned and the monies that the Chinese and Russians have given you and you've moved it into Bitcoin,
Hmm.
it's pretty much shielded from being taken. I don't know how well you can move it around or do much with it when you're locked up in a federal penitentiary in Colorado, but
Hmm.
um, it's not like you're seizing suitcases full of money like Manuel Noriega had in his walls, right? So for me, it's a lack of understanding it.
Okay. So your skepticism is more so about not understanding the technology, not necessarily the volatility or the people who are promoting it.
Correct.
Okay.
I think for most people that are investors, and mind you, investors, not trying to shield, but most people that are investors, you need to understand how that investment works.
Understood. Understood.
So,
Now, obviously, I'm sorry, go ahead.
well, I was going to say, so if you're working hard promoting any kind of investment with your BB Rebozo, who worked for Nixon and embezzled $200 million way back in the day, or Bernie Madoff, who created a Ponzi scheme, he understood how it worked very well. His clients didn't. So what happened to his clients? They lost $1 billion, right? Bernie Madoff knew how it worked. Same thing with Bitcoin. Tom Genn does not know how it works. So
Right.
I'm one of the Bernie Madoff ignorant investors that's, if you got more money than brains, who cares? You're gonna invest in some of it just to have it. But if you're
Right.
conscientious about understanding how that works and how the monies move, then you need to understand it. And I'm going to say for people my age, it's a new investment vehicle, and we don't or are not familiar with it enough to be comfortable about it.
Okay. Now, with it being a newer investment vehicle, I mean, it's only 17 years old, and so far it has institutional validation, it has governmental validation, it has Wall Street validation, it has mainstream validation. It has come a long way in this short 17 years. It's reached a market cap of $1 trillion. It took Google almost 40 years to do that. It took Microsoft almost 40 years to do that. And in a short period of time, what we've seen is more demand for this brand new emerging asset. And you ask yourself, why? Well, think about what Bitcoin was born out of. It was born out of the '08 housing crisis. Some developers kind of got fed up with the
Uh oh.
powers that having complete
Are you
control.
still there?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Can you hear me? Uh oh. Not sure why I did that again, but so where I was getting at, Tom, is it was born out of frustration. We've seen multiple cycles of how fiat currencies end up throughout society. We've seen them fail over and over again, and it's always due to the same reason. It's always too much excessive money printing. Governments have big, ambitious ideas and things that they want to accomplish. And unfortunately, on a gold standard, you can't accomplish most of what they imagine without being patient or without taking resources from other countries, right? And so what governments ultimately reverted to was like, hey, we'll just print our way to prosperity. And so what we saw is this huge takeoff in productivity, but all of a sudden, wages couldn't keep up. Housing became unaffordable. The prices of cars tripled, doubled, quadrupled, and real working people, the real working class, are the people who are affected the most by reckless fiscal policy. So Bitcoin is literally just an idea, Tom, but it's an idea whose time has come. And what do we know about ideas whose time has come? It's very disruptive to existing systems. So, for example, for Amazon to be successful, Unfortunately, 15,000 other retailers had to go out of business. And in order for Apple to be successful, 15,000 other device manufacturers had to go out of business. So, when things are emerging, when stuff is new, sometimes it can disrupt existing industries. And you always have to ask yourself, who stands to lose the most? So it's no surprise that in 2013, there were millions of dollars invested into a CIA campaign designed to try to smear Bitcoin. The whole thing was to try to avert people's attention away from it, tell people it was a scam, it was rat poison. And Warren Buffett also mentioned it being rat poison as well. And you said something interesting earlier, Tom. You talked about, a person's age having a lot to do with your conviction level towards certain investments. And I believe that if Warren Buffett was 40 years younger, he would think Bitcoin was the most fascinating thing that he's ever laid eyes on because it is an open source protocol. And when something is open source, Tom, it's literally available for anybody who can read software language to verify, critique, and ultimately nitpick at. And as developers started looking at this Bitcoin software protocol, they were fascinated with how thorough it was and how there were literally no holes in it. And so here we are 17 years later, an asset goes from $0 to $90,000, well on its way to $1 million. And you have to ask yourself, okay, well, how high can it go? Well, the answer to that question is actually infinity because when governments continue to print money, it drives the prices of all assets higher. And whatever is the most scarce and in demand usually is the most violent recipient of that liquidity injection into economies. So, from your perspective, are there any parallels, Tom, between the way that you look at Bitcoin and things that were once considered risky or unnecessary early on in your career?
That's a twofold question, and it's answered differently. Uh, because I still don't understand Bitcoin. If what you're suggesting is it's basically just tied to the worldwide government's printing of money, then it's not really an investment vehicle. It is a hedge
Hmm.
against global inflationary policy. Usually, when you're talking about an investment vehicle, whether it's a house, real estate, or what, you are looking at trying to own something that generates revenue as well as maintains value as you move through life.
Hmm.
So to me, it's twofold. When we were talking earlier and I said I saw Bitcoin as a hedge, what you just described is exactly that. If France, Germany, the United States, and Japan are carrying tons of debt and printing tons of money so that the cost of anything that has any actual value goes up, whether it's a Rolex watch or a gold bar or what, or Bitcoin, then it's basically tied to that influx of additional capitalization coming from basically printing free money. Tom Genn or Cordell goes out and buys a duplex and we rehab it and we rent it out. That investment vehicle is then part of our portfolio trying to generate increased revenue. In other words, it's not fixed. We're not just sitting on it as dirt, which would be an awful lot like Bitcoin. We're also trying to generate revenue from that vehicle.
Hmm.
To me, that's the difference.
Okay. And when you mention, just sitting on Bitcoin like dirt, right? That almost implies that if it's something I just have to sit on and I can't actually use, then it's really useless. That has no value if there's no utility involved outside of being a hedge. But the thing about Bitcoin, Tom, is it actually does have a lot of utility. First and foremost, what it does is it directly protects data, it protects information. So if I send something to you, no person can intercept it. It'll go directly to you. That information can't be muted, it can't be changed, it can't be altered, and it can't be tampered with. Now, how important is that if governments or presidents need to communicate with one another on secure communication channels without any third party being able to audit, tamper, or manipulate that message. Well, that probably has a lot of value to world leaders, governments, presidents, kings, etc. Um, they would like for their communication channels to be secured. When you look at owning anything, let's say you own a house, right? Or I'll give you this example, Tom. You own a warehouse in New York, and this warehouse is worth millions of dollars. And a genie comes out of a bottle and say, "Tom, I'll grant you three wishes as it pertains to this warehouse." What is going to be your wish, right? You already got a warehouse worth $1 million. What more can you add to it? And you tell this genie, "Well, for my first wish, I would like for you to make this warehouse indestructible." And the genie grants that wish for you and say, "Okay, you have two more wishes. What would you like to do with this $1 million warehouse?" You say, "Well, okay. Could you make it where anybody who might want to come into the building, steal, vandalize, could you make it to where the building is actually invisible to anybody that might want to try to do it harm?" And the genie says, "Yes, yes, you have one more wish left. What else can I do for you?" And you think to yourself, "Okay, well, I like New York. The New York market is cool, but I would love to try the West Coast market during the best times of the year. Can you make it to where I can maybe teleport this building across the planet at the speed of light?" And the genie grants that wish for you. So now you have a $1 million warehouse that is now indestructible. It's invisible to anybody that might want to harm you, and it can be teleported across the planet at the speed of light. Now, I only have one question for you, Tom. Is that warehouse still worth $1 million?
No, it would probably be worth considerably more.
Exponentially more, because in typical real estate, what's the half life of a building? What you got, about 100 years, depending on how it's designed. I mean, the
Well,
Romans
I
used
was
it for the best infrastructure. Um,
concrete, but I was going with location, location, location. A $400,000 house in Michigan is $4 million out in the San Francisco Bay Area.
mhm, absolutely.
Same house.
So,
If I can take
same
my
house.
house here and move it, yeah, to San Francisco.
Now that was a great analogy introduced by Michael Saylor, the CEO of MicroStrategy, and the point he was trying to make with that analogy is, when you look at something like Bitcoin, right? Today, the current price is valued around $90,000. But if I told you it was indestructible, invisible to people who might want to try to confiscate it from you, tax you, or do you any harm, and it's teleportable across the planet at the speed of light, is it still worth $90,000? And I think it's the same answer here. It's, for the first time ever, what we created with Bitcoin is actual digital property. And most people don't understand how blockchains work, proof of work, cryptography. I understand these are like very complicated technological advances. However, you still have to do your own homework. You still have to do your own due diligence and understand what this system is all about. But more importantly, understanding that those foundational principles are there. And so, with Bitcoin having these attributes, there's really not a price that you can put on it. So it's a finite digital asset that everybody across the entire world have access to, as long as they have an internet connection. And they don't need a government's permission at all. It's permissionless digital property. And we've never seen that in our lifetimes. So we're all having these various reactions to what it is. And most of us are taken aback completely. And some of us are living well into the future. I have what I consider to be my Bible right here. This document right here, I consider to be more important than the Constitution. This is the Bitcoin white paper that was published in 2008. And it lays out the foundation of what Bitcoin is and how it operates. And that this 9-page document is going to change humanity forever, simply because It's going to remove the incentive to try to use violence as a way to acquire wealth, as guys like Genghis Khan or Caesar used to do when they saw that neighboring countries or entities were weaker than them. They would just do what nature does. It would just take from the weak. But now that we have Maduro captured, and I'm hearing that this could potentially be about Bitcoin, there is really nothing we can do unless he has private keys that are available on hard drives or something. All we can do is torture the guy and hope that he comes out of the Bitcoin. But other than that, you can't just confiscate it from him. But I will say this, Tom. A lot of people look at Venezuela, the invasion in Venezuela, about oil, but I know we know that it's deeper than that. Obviously, Brazil, Russia, China, and all of the BRIC nations, they were trying to get away from the petrodollar, understanding that the U.S. dollar is collapsing. So, what would be a genius backdoor way to get around OPEC's regulations? That would be to utilize Bitcoin for trading large volumes of oil, which is what some speculate they were doing with Venezuela, who've amassed somewhere around 5 to 600,000 bitcoins. Well, this is a perfect opportunity for the U.S. to maybe swoop, maybe confiscate, and add to our own strategic reserve. So, with that said, Tom, do you think that Bitcoin has a better chance of going to a million, or is it likely going to zero from your perspective?
I don't know that it's going to go to a million, and I don't think it's going to go to zero. I think it is a vehicle whereby you can shield wealth, and that has value. But when you talk about BRICS and Venezuela, I agree with you. It's a lot deeper than that. I think it's geopolitical. I think it's forcing Putin and Maduro and the Ayatollah and Z, the freak out of the Western Hemisphere. And as a result, you're going to create instability in those countries.
Hmm.
Russia's kind of on its last legs. They've lost Syria, they've lost Iraq, they've lost their influence in Iran now, and they just lost their influence in Venezuela. So, is Putin sitting on a wealth of Bitcoin? And what happens when he dies? How does he transfer that to his heirs? And is
Hmm.
it transferable generationally without the ability to have it confiscated or seized by whomever has power there? Same thing with Maduro, same thing with Venezuela, but Venezuela is sitting on the largest gold reserves, the largest oil reserves, the largest silver reserves, basically in the Western Hemisphere.
Hmm.
And that also has an awful lot of value. So,
And
which would
to answer that,
Cordell prefer to own? Bitcoin or actual mining rights?
say that one more time. I'm sorry.
Which would Cordell rather have? Bitcoin or actual mineral rights, mining rights in Venezuela?
I knowing what I know now, I would like to have Bitcoin. If I didn't know about Bitcoin, I would want the mineral rights. Bitcoin is just a perfected version of gold. Remember, gold became inconveniencing as you accumulated more of it. So they came up with this brilliant idea. Hey, what if we leave our gold at this warehouse and you give us a note instead that says how much gold we have in that warehouse? It's a lot easy for me to take this piece of paper and walk it across the planet safely than it is to carry $10 billion worth of gold with me. It's a lot safer as well. So the paper was obvious. It was an obvious transition on why we made that shift. But then the forces that came after that, the fractional reserve banking system that was born out of fractional reserve assets, is everything that followed, and here we are today with a failing currency. And so to answer your question, yes, Bitcoin is absolutely transferable when you die. You just need to make sure you're responsible. And what do we know about the flip side of freedom? It's responsibility. When you're free from all government control, now all of a sudden you're responsible for your own life. You're not relying on the government to take care of you or protect you. You're responsible now. So you have to responsibly make sure that your private key to access that Bitcoin is either written down or shared with someone in your life who you absolutely trust. That is how you share it. It's shared through a very, very, very long password. And some people have that password in their head. I don't think that's smart to just keep it there. But some people write it down. Some people tattoo it in different languages on their skin. There's different creative ways that you can go about creating succession with your Bitcoin keys when you pass away. So I look forward to seeing a way in the future where we get creative. A lot of older people, Tom, what they do is they go to third-party custodians, like simply like we do with our trust. And you have a custodian hold on to it, and if something happens to you, then the succession process will take place. But Bitcoin satisfies the main characteristics that money should satisfy. And what are those primary characteristics? Number one, it needs to be divisible. You need a form of money that you can easily divide, and the units can still be used indivisibly. You also need money that is portable. So we can buy and sell houses, but we can't really use it as money. It has to be portable through time and space. If I can't move it over to Singapore or Japan or China, it's really not a good money if I can't port it through time and space. Next, it needs to be a scarcity. It can't be something that John Doe can print in his mom's basement and go around buying up all the goods and services in the economy. It also needs to be durable, right? So I can't use apples as money because it might not last long enough for me to transact whatever I'm trying to acquire. And lastly, it needs recognizability. So we started calling gold sound money because some people, when you throw it at the ground, it makes a specific sound, or if you bite it a certain way, you could tell that it was actual gold. It needs to be easily recognizable. When you look at US dollars, everybody knows what it is across the globe at this point, so it has the most recognizability out of any currency ever. And so this is the reason why we have the world's reserve currency along with other factors. But Bitcoin absolutely satisfies all of these characteristics, and the US dollar can't satisfy the scarcity factor, which is the most important factor, because if I'm not able to store the money for later use, then I'm being punished for being a disciplined individual, for being a disciplined human being, for deciding not to go out on the weekends and spend excessive amounts of money, or buying large homes that I don't really need, or buying jewelry. I actually get punished if I hold on to it and decide to be frugal. That is the definition of a broken money system. Would you agree?
Well, you touched on about 10 different topics. A broken money system, and you're assuming ours is broken.
Hmm.
I frankly choose to disagree. I don't think ours is broken at all. I think it is um, pressured by an awful lot of different indicators. Out of everything that you just said, you still have not addressed the one issue that I keep pressing, which is, how is it an investment vehicle? Meaning, you alluded to the fact that, let's just say you're sitting on a ton of gold, and that Bitcoin represents the cost of that ton of gold, but that gold physically exists someplace. Bitcoin is not backed by gold. So, what exists that substantiates the value of Bitcoin other than the thought processes of the people that are utilizing it. In other words, it's hypothetical in a variety of issues.
Is from your perspective, Tom, is energy, electricity, is that hypothetical?
Uh, the electricity itself is hypothetical until you generate it. Remember that there is a plant or something that is creating that electricity.
Hmm.
So understand DT, consumers, whomever has to create the generational capabilities to create the electricity in the first place. And electricity is not finite, meaning the Chinese are opening up one new coal fired plant every week. The
Hmm.
United States is actively now pursuing generational capacity, whether it's nuclear or what, tied to increased demand for electricity. So, again, if you're saying Bitcoin is tied directly to electricity, okay, is it the future generational capacity or the electricity that already exists in the grid? Or is the future generational capacity of electricity, the ability to create it, going to then control the price of Bitcoin as that capacity enters the market?
Great question, Tom. When Bitcoin had its first market price back in 2012, the price was specifically based on how much energy, how much electricity had to be expended to produce a single Bitcoin in the first place. That's how the price was originally established. And what we know about energy in general, not just electricity, but energy, if you understand thermodynamics, then you understand energy cannot be created nor destroyed. So there is a finite amount of it. And when it comes to Bitcoin, it uses a proof of work system, which means you have to be able to prove that you actually did the work, meaning the miners actually used X amount of electricity and donated it to this network. Now, I know I'm kind of speaking Chinese. I'm just trying to assure you here that it is backed by something that is actually measurable and actually tangible. And someone asks, well, what if the grid goes out? What if we have no more power? Well, engineer can figure out how to create power. I mean, if you had gravity, if you had pressure, if you had friction, if you had heat, there are a number of ways where you can harness energy. So I'm not worried about that. And some people ask, okay, well, what if the internet goes out? And so much of our lives is tied into the internet that that would actually be an apocalyptic black swan event. I'm not saying it can't happen. I'm just saying, based off of the infrastructure that we have today, we've built our lives around the internet, military communication channels, pacemakers in people's hearts. Every phone call that you make is across the internet. So we've built our lives into it now. So it's kind of too late to imagine a hypothetical like that, because all we have to do at that point is just wait. Just wait. Someone will get everything back up. They'll get the communication channels back up. And if they don't, then that means that's the end of humanity anyway. This is a new regime. It's a new civilization at that point. But I understand that this is something that's probably not appealing to people who have more money than time. As you mentioned earlier, it's probably more appealing to people who do have a horizon of 30, 40, maybe even 50 years. I totally understand that, Tom. Um, but if Bitcoin is not the answer, what is the answer for preserving value over time? Follow-up question, Tom. If Bitcoin isn't the answer, from your perspective, what is the answer for preserving value over time?
What for preserving value over time?
Yep.
Are you assuming that preserving value over time is a necessity?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Why?
Well, if I don't know what the fiscal policy is going to look like in the next 30 days, the next 6 months, or the next year, it's very difficult for me as an individual, as a father, as a husband, as a businessman to plan for the future if I don't know what I have to work with. The reason why we hold on to cash during times of uncertainty is because cash gives you the most optionality in times of uncertainty. So it's the reason why we liquidate and we hold on to the cash. But if I don't know what the fiscal policy looks like down the line, it's very difficult for me to plan for the future. That's why I
Okay.
view it as a necessity.
Then I know how to answer your question. I'm going to say, how do you preserve value over time? Is investing in yourself,
Beautiful.
whether that's education, starting your own company. Um, what's that? There's a very famous poem, "Do not go gently into that good night." I think life is meant to be lived, and being concerned about what the United States government or China might do in 10 years is for a portfolio manager or an investment guy trying to help you with what your retirement's going to look like,
Hmm.
not in deference to fear of making sure you've got a nest egg set aside in case there's a problem on the home front.
Hmm.
In other words, to answer your question, I think Bitcoin is a great investment, and I think it probably needs to be a part of an awful lot of people's portfolios. And I think it has an awful lot of advantages towards how you treat monies in partnership in a marriage, monies in partnership with business. But as far as weathering the storms or whatever, it's about putting your best foot forward, not going gently into that good night, and investing in yourself and having the confidence to move forward.
Tom, that's a hell of a perspective, man. Hey, listen, I appreciate you for joining me for this discussion, man. Like I said, you're an individual who has a lot of wisdom. I look forward to extracting as much of it as I can before you decide to go visit the man upstairs. Hopefully, he's left some room for you. But I want to extract as much wisdom as I can from you, man. So I appreciate you joining me for this discussion. Listen, for the folks out there in the audience, if you guys have gotten any value from this, I want you to make sure that you like this video, share it with a friend who's into these types of subjects, who's after this type of knowledge, and make sure you tune in next time. We'll catch y'all on the next episode. Thank you.